Great, Chris. I will get us started. Welcome, everyone. Hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving holiday. Thank you all for being here tonight. I will call this virtual special public hearing to order. Today is Monday, November 30th. It is 6:05 p.m. My name is... So I'm going to jump to asking folks who are not speaking to please put themselves on mute. But we'll get to all the sort of rules of this interesting situation we find ourselves in because of the coronavirus pandemic in a moment. But first, introductions. I'm Rob Klee, the chair of the Woodbridge Town Plan and Zoning Commission. You have with us here tonight, other members of the commission. And I think, Larry, you might need to mute yourself.
I can mute him.
Thank you.
Okay.
Our other members of the commission include Larry Greenberg, how are you? Kathleen Wallace, Yoni Zamir, Paul Schatz, Andrew Skolnick, and Jeff Kennedy, I see as well. Thank you all for being here tonight. We are supported ably by Chris Sullivan, and I think Betsy Yagla are helping run the WebEx and the logistics tonight. And as I said earlier, we're operating this hearing remotely under the auspices of the governor's executive orders to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. So thank you all in advance for your patience and your willingness to do this via technology. We all appreciate it. I will ask everyone who is not speaking to try to keep themselves on mute and mute their audio so we don't get feedback. So tonight is a special hearing, a special meeting, to have a public hearing on the application that's before us. That is from the applicants 2 Orchard Road LLC and the Open Communities Trust LLC, I believe are represented by the Jerome and Frank Legal Services Organization. All the relevant documents related to this application are available on the town website. Thank you, Chris, for having those posted online. So the commission understands that we are operating under our general statutory framework for regulating land uses through the zoning processes of Connecticut. And those zoning rules are designed to achieve certain objectives, many of which are found in Connecticut General Statutes 8-2. These objectives include, among other things, promoting the health and general welfare, encouraging the most appropriate land uses or the use of land throughout a town, including encouraging development of housing opportunities and opportunities for multifamily dwellings consistent with soil types, terrain, and infrastructure capacity, and promoting housing choice and economic diversity in housing, including housing for both low and moderate income households. And again, all those excerpts are from the governing statutes, Connecticut General Statutes 8-2. So our discussions tonight, however, are not going to be about what is done or was not done in the past. What we have before us is a proposed text amendment. And we intend to have a very thoughtful and thorough process about these proposed amendments and whether they achieve the objectives of zoning under Connecticut law and how these amendments would affect or impact the future development of our community. So we are having this special meeting and this public hearing for a fairly limited purpose. There are only 2 things in front of us. One is a proposed text amendment to the town's plan of conservation development. These types of requests are actually fairly infrequent, and the amendment of the plan of conservation development has a different process. It includes a referral to the Board of Selectmen. And because of the required time frame for that referral, the hearing tonight will be continued to a later date, which we'll announce at the end of the hearing before we adjourn for the evening, but continue this public hearing into the future. We will also post that future meeting and its time on the town's planning and zoning website. Another element is also a referral to our South Central Regional Council of Governments, which is also required. The second thing in front of us is a proposed text amendment to our town zoning regulations. This is something that's more bread and butter that we deal with all the time here in our Plan and Zoning Commission. That type of amendment also requires a referral to that South Central Regional Council of Governments. Another thing to note, again, in the limited nature, there's no specific property that is pending before us at the Planning and Zoning Commission. The applicant provided an illustrative conceptual layout for a property on Orchard Road, but the proposed amendments actually apply to much more broadly. The amendments, if adopted, would allow for the development of that Orchard Road site in the future, though it is not a proposal specific to that one site only. No other proposals are pending before our Planning and Zoning Commission as part of this application. So thank you for indulging me in that introduction. I'll go over some of the logistics for this evening. The applicant is going to present first, and I've been told that that presentation could be 90 minutes or more in length. So we're prepared for that. Then I would recommend that our Plan and Zone Commission members wait until the continued public hearing before we ask our questions or provide input. So we have time to digest what is a very lengthy application. I've had this at my bedside for reading for weeks. Does put me to sleep quite nicely. That's humor, not meant to. That's my attempt at humor. You'll have to bear with me. So this is a lengthy application. We're going to hear a lot tonight, and we're also going to hear hopefully quite a bit from the public. And I know we have quite a few folks who are in the Zoom meeting, and I know there are others watching on the various local YouTube channels or other ways. So for our Planning and Zoning Commission members, and again, we're also, not all of us have been here through the entire history of planning and zoning, including the amendments that happened recently. So I would suggest that we defer our questioning till the continued part of the hearing, which will be at the later date, so we can have more time for the applicant's presentation and then the public comment period. I also propose that in the interest of sanity for us all, that we have an end time for tonight's portion, knowing that we have to continue, that we will adjourn tonight at 9 p.m. or thereabouts to kind of give us a break. 3 hours is quite a while to go. So the applicant's going to present, then everyone in the public who wishes to speak will have 3 minutes each to do so. I believe there's a way in WebEx to raise your hand using the WebEx functions, and we will run through the people as we see that their hands are raised. And for the members of the public, if you don't have a chance to speak tonight, please rest assured you'll have the opportunity at the continued hearing, and at that continued public hearing, the public will go first. Or if you don't feel like, if you're here to listen or you want to digest yourself, you can feel free to wait on your public comments tonight for that continued hearing, or you're always free to submit written comments electronically to Chris Sullivan at ksullivan@woodbridgect.org, or you can mail it to the Planning and Zoning Commission, 11 Meeting House Lane, Woodbridge, Connecticut, 06525. Written comments, either by email or handwritten or regular mail, will receive the same consideration as any comments that are spoken at our public hearing, as long as they're received before the public hearing process is closed. All righty. So this is the point in time where I'm going to pass it over to our applicant for the presentation, although Paul Schatz, it looks like you have a timing procedural question.
Yes. Regarding comments already received by the commission from the public, are those going to be read into the record or just submitted without having to read them?
No, those are submitted, and well, no, we do have to read them, Paul. So we will read them as part of our deliberation. They're part of the public record. We do not have to do the oral reading by me into the record.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay.
No, we don't have to do that. Thank you, Paul. Good question. All righty.
So Erin is up, and she's going to do our introduction, and I've passed the baton to Erin. So if you need to use your computer, you should be able to.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having us here tonight. My name is Erin Boggs. I'm the Executive Director of Open Communities Alliance. OCA is a Connecticut-based organization with a board that, apart from one national civil rights expert, lives in Connecticut. Our mission is to combat residential segregation in Connecticut by working with an urban-suburban interracial coalition to promote housing access and choice for all people. I'm also here representing Open Communities Trust, which is a nonprofit affiliate of OCA. We thank the Commission for giving us this opportunity to present our proposal in full and take any questions at the end. We know the Commission and residents will have lots of questions. We've worked hard to anticipate them and provide thorough responses. We're here today to open Woodbridge by making changes to the town's zoning regulations and plan of conservation and development in order to end a long period of exclusionary housing practices. Woodbridge's current housing plans and regulations restrict the construction of multifamily buildings and affordable homes. They have also prevented many non-white and moderate income families from moving to Woodbridge, and for decades helped entrench segregation by race and income in the region. Exclusionary zoning has particularly deep roots in Woodbridge. The town was actually a pioneer in exclusion, imposing restrictions as early as the 1930s that other Connecticut suburbs later used as models. Decade after decade, Woodbridge rejected proposals to increase housing opportunities and doubled down on these practices. As a result, Woodbridge is far wealthier and far whiter than the surrounding region, while immense and growing needs for affordable housing in the region remain unmet. There are likely Woodbridge residents who were unaware of this exclusionary history. We hope they will agree that this segregation has no place in Connecticut and that the values in our state and our country's laws stand against these practices. Woodbridge's planning and zoning regime clearly violates the Connecticut Constitution, various Connecticut statutes, and the Fair Housing Act. Our proposal for immediate action this commission can take to begin to right these wrongs is a simple one. First, we ask that Woodbridge change its zoning to allow multifamily housing with affordable units in all of its residential zones, subject to the existing bulk requirements and public health code. In much of the residentially zoned land, this would mean allowing small-scale multifamily homes following the same long-standing rules that apply to single-family homes in terms of height, setback, etc. This will allow OCA's development subsidiary, Open Communities Trust, and a partner developer to build a modest 4-unit home with affordable units at 2 Orchard Road. This change would typically also allow other property owners who so choose to build their own small-scale multifamily homes throughout the town, providing an affordable housing option to those who want to move to Woodbridge. Second, because our proposed changes to the zoning code are just a first step, we also ask that Woodbridge amend its plan of conservation and development to allow for greater affordability and diversity. As set forth in our application letter, the town should overhaul its residential land use policies and practices by planning and zoning for Woodbridge's fair share of the affordable housing need in the region. I want to be clear about exactly what our amendments entail. Today, we are not proposing to change any part of the zoning code other than its restriction on multifamily homes. Our zoning text amendment will not change minimum lot sizes, building height or coverage, sewer and water regulations, or setback requirements. Buildings will still have to comply with all of these regulations. What we are immediately proposing is that homes the size and look of those built under current law should be able to house a few families instead of just one, and that Woodbridge should reorient its policies by welcoming families who rely on affordable housing. We hope that you come away from our presentation convinced that the status quo zoning practices of Woodbridge are in need of change. We recognize that conversations around issues of segregation and exclusion are hard conversations, especially when we're talking about the ways in which our own communities still don't live up to our ideals of racial justice. Woodbridge has committed to addressing racial inequities in the wake of the racial justice movement that has swept across the nation over the last few months. We hope that this movement can be an opportunity for Woodbridge residents to engage in that hard conversation together and move forward to end the exclusionary practices that have helped shape this town for decades. I will now turn our presentation over to Anika Singh-Lamar, clinical professor at Yale Law School, who will give you some background and a further roadmap. Thank you.
Okay. Just to let you know, I have to bring her in as a participant, so she was not on your list. Okay.
Okay, thank you. My name is Anika Singh-Lamar. I am a clinical associate professor of law and a supervising attorney at the Jerome and Frank Legal Services Organization at 127 Wall Street here in New Haven, Connecticut. I just want to briefly introduce the team that will be making our presentation tonight. Sean Yang is a student at the Yale School of Architecture. Karen Anderson, Hannah Abloh, Chuan-Ling Xu, and Patrick Holland are all students at the Yale Law School. All are student interns with the Jerome and Frank Legal Services Organization, acting under the supervision of attorney Jay Pottinger and myself. They will be followed by architect Jack Kemper, developer and home builder Tony DeNorfio, and planning expert Don Poland. We think that this will move most expeditiously if you're willing to hold questions until the end, as it may be the case that a question that arises in your mind early in the presentation is answered at a later portion in the presentation. Thank you so much for hearing us out. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean Yang.
Thank you, Attorney Singh-Lamar. Ms. Sullivan, could you provide me with screen share?
I did. There you go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Yang. I am a student intern with the Jerome and Frank Legal Services Organization at 127 Wall Street in New Haven. To better understand the significance of our proposed amendment, it's important to first consider the current state of residential zoning in the town of Woodbridge, and in particular, the town's lack of multifamily and low to moderate income housing opportunities. So here we see a chart taken directly from your zoning regulations. The top shows the Woodbridge's 13 zoning district, as you all know. The second column shows the allowable uses. Single family construction is permitted with a non-discretionary permit, meaning single family homes can essentially be built as of right in zoning districts A, B, T3C, T3BB, and T3D, which was left out in this chart in the 2019 table, but was amended in a recent update. In contrast, multifamily is permitted nowhere in the town of Woodbridge. Proponents for increased housing density and affordability might at first see hope in the fact that duplex construction is permitted in zones T3C and T3D. But a closer look at the map shows us that this is really a mirage. Outlined here are the limits of the town of Woodbridge. Highlighted in yellow is the area planned for duplexes, a tiny 0.2% of the town's land, barely visible from an aerial perspective. And let's compare that to what's pink, which is zone A for single family residences, which covers the majority of Woodbridge. Zooming into T3C and T3D, we see that these duplex units are confined to just a few blocks in the commercial section of town, which borders New Haven. If one was a keen reader of the zoning regulations, you may even argue that multifamily is available as accessory units through special exception in the GBA zone. Again, this is a complete illusion. The GBA area is even smaller than the T3C and T3D zones we just looked at. A closer analysis of the regulations further show how restrictive these accessory units are. First, it has to be accessory to a legal non-residential use. And in the context of the GBA zone, this means accessory to a building with a commercial ground floor. What this leaves us with is buildings in the area that are perhaps not the best options for placing residential units. Marked in red is a non-exhaustive list of some of the eligible commercial buildings to add ADUs onto in its second floor. Possible options range from the Amity Bowl to Citizens Bank. Moving down, we see that these units are actually just small apartments with a maximum area of 650 square feet. This is rather compressed, especially for families with children. So despite state law to the contrary, multifamily housing in Woodbridge is highly restricted by the size of its district, the small maximum square footage of each unit, and the limited possibilities of where each unit can be built on. And duplex housing, as we talked about earlier, is also severely limited by its tiny zone where it's allowed. Housing opportunities for families of low to moderate income do not exist. What is needed from Woodbridge now is increased housing density to create housing affordability. There are two factors here artificially affecting housing price. First is the lot size required to build the housing on, and second is the number of units one can build on each parcel. And Woodbridge has severe limits on both, starting with minimum lot size. In virtually all of the residentially zoned areas of Woodbridge, the only housing permitted is single-family homes on lots of at least 65,000 square feet, or approximately 1.5 acres. In much of this town, the minimum actually goes up. For units created after November 9th, 2001, and located close by a drinking water supply watershed, the minimum lot size is 2 acres. Units that fall under these requirements accounts for half of the new homes built into town. In comparison, this is far greater than median lot sizes for single-family homes found throughout America, as illustrated in this map. In 2017, the Census Bureau reported 62% of single-family homes in the United States were sited on lots less than 9,000 square feet, or 0.2 acres. Woodbridge's single-family residential zoning also limits the number of housing units you can build on that lot to a single unit, which further decreases housing density and restricts housing supply in the region. The minimum lot size affects the housing price because the more land you have to buy, the more land you're required to buy for the house, the more expensive the housing on top becomes. This combined overregulation on minimum lot sizes and maximum units per parcel set an artificial price floor for housing in the area, creating a barrier to entry for low and moderate income households. For reference, in 2019, average home values for single-family residences was over $400,000 in Woodbridge, compared to $259,000 in Connecticut or $232,000 in New Haven County area. Woodbridge's single-family residential zones do not provide any realistic opportunity for the development of any affordable housing whatsoever. Finally, Woodbridge's zoning regulation does contain an affordable housing district, an AHD. A closer look at this section of regulations tells us that this AHD section is virtually unusable. And it's not just us, developers agree. A comprehensive review of the town records indicates that this provision of the zoning regulations has not been used since its 1996 enactment. In fact, the AHD appears to have been designed to ensure it would never be used. The AHD only allows single-family attached and detached housing, as well as age-restricted housing. It also contains unnecessary and exclusionary requirements not found in any other zone. In most of Woodbridge, in Zone A, setbacks for single-family residences are 75 feet in the front, 25 feet on the sides and back. In contrast, an AHD development in the same zone requires an affordable housing district setback of 150 feet in the front and 50 feet at the side. This is essentially a moat that's double the setback requirements of an equivalent single-family residence. And Woodbridge doesn't stop here. For AHD developments in Zone A, there's a minimum lot size requirement of 12 acres compared to the typical 1.5, additional yard setbacks, a minimum and maximum unit per acre requirement, as well as additional building separation setbacks. These cumulative restrictions render the AHD zone unusable. And furthermore, the Zoning Commission has failed to update the AHD district over the years. Here, we compare two charts by Woodbridge on the AHD district. The one on the top is from 1996 when it was enacted, and the one on the bottom is from 2019. I'll quickly run through some of the information that's been lost over the years. The zoning district that accompanies each AHD district is no longer labeled. The entire column is gone, so any developer who wants to bring in housing doesn't even know which set of restrictions they would be using. Column labels for a minimum lot size, district, minimum road frontage are missing. And things like, as we see in column 6, sudden changes without explanation, Here it's from maximum number of housing units per buildable acre to minimum number of housing units. The scrivener's errors reveal that this zone is so unusable that Woodbridge hasn't even noticed all these errors that have accrued over the years. Any developer trying to bring in affordable housing is left completely in the dark. This extremely restrictive zoning, coupled with missing and unupdated information in regulation, has rendered the development of multifamily or affordable housing, as required by law, illegal in Woodbridge. The current zoning regulations would ensure that low and moderate income households will continue to be excluded from living in Woodbridge. And the data bears out this conclusion. Reading directly from the town's 2015 to 2025 Plan of Conservation and Development, I quote, "Current Woodbridge incomes are highly concentrated in the top 3 categories of households earning $100,000 or more each year. Conversely, far fewer Woodbridge households fall into low to moderate income categories. And moreover, high housing costs pose affordability challenges. And at the time of writing this POCD, only 39 units or 1.1% of the town's housing stocks were assisted by state or federal housing affordability programs. And little has changed since the town issued its current POCD. Today, the town has 3,478 units. The state credits Woodbridge with 43 units of assisted housing, 1.24% of the town's total housing stock. Of that 43, 30 are age restricted for seniors, leaving only 13 or 0.37% of the town's housing units to be counted as affordable by the state and available to families with children. So despite state law to the contrary, Woodbridge's current zoning does not allow for multifamily housing. Housing opportunities for families of low to moderate income simply do not exist, and those families will continue to be excluded from Woodbridge unless action is taken. I will now turn things over to my colleague, Karen Anderson, to discuss Woodbridge's history of exclusionary zoning and how we got to where we are today.
Thank you. Mrs. Sullivan, could you give me screen sharing ability as well? I see it now. Thanks so much. All right. I think my screen has started sharing. Perfect. Thank you again, and good evening, everybody. My name is Karen Anderson. I'm also a student intern with the Jerome and Frank Legal Services Organization at 127 Wall Street in New Haven. And now that my colleague, Mr. Yang, has given us an overview of Woodbridge's current zoning, I wanted to zoom out to further contextualize our application by talking about some of the history that's brought us here tonight. In our application materials, as many may have seen, we included a thorough analysis of decades of Woodbridge zoning decisions that have restricted housing opportunities and perpetuated racial segregation. And to do this, we spent hours looking through public records of this commission's meeting minutes that go back about a half century. And we found that during some of these decision points over the years, there actually were moments of possibility when Woodbridge considered saying yes to making it easier for low and moderate income families to move here. And that has not happened yet, but we're here tonight with a proposal that gives Woodbridge another chance to start remedying its long history of exclusion. And before diving in to the history, I just want to reiterate what this exclusion looks like. As you see at the top of this slide and the blue bar, today Woodbridge's median income is over $142,000 compared to $68,000 across the South Central Connecticut region. And as you see on the bottom, only 8.3% of Woodbridge's population is Black or Hispanic, compared to 29.9% of South Central Connecticut's population. And a major driver of this segregated status quo is high housing costs. As you heard from my colleague, Mr. Yang, the median home value in Woodbridge is over $400,000. And that's far higher than elsewhere in the region. And it's also beyond a level affordable to households making $42,000 or $45,000, which happen to be the median incomes for Black and Hispanic households in this region. And so as a result of the zoning restrictions that Mr. Yang described, this is where Woodbridge is in terms of exclusion, and the history shows us how this happened. So Woodbridge's very first zoning regulations go back to 1932, and the land use scholar Robert Ellickson has actually noted that Woodbridge was a pioneer in imposing the binding large lot requirements that it has back in the 1930s, which other Connecticut suburbs then mimicked in later decades. And the Residence A district, which you saw on that previous slide in pink, which still covers the vast majority of the town, it originally had a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet and has since more than tripled to 65,000 square feet, which is that 1.5 acre lot size that we were just talking about. And because of these very restrictions, a 1976 report from the Yale School of Public Health noted that Woodbridge had been rightfully criticized for its quote unquote snob zoning. There was another notable report in 1978 from Connecticut's Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. And that's the agency which enforces Connecticut's various laws against discrimination. And this report identified Woodbridge as one of the towns with the most severely restricted zoning in the state. And it pointed to the town's homogeneous demographics. At the time, Woodbridge's population was only 1.3% Black, and that's a figure that is still less than 3% today, despite the fact that South Central Connecticut's Black population increased significantly in that very same time frame and is now over 13.5%. And this just goes to show that even in an era of major regional changes, exclusionary zoning is devastatingly effective at keeping towns like Woodbridge walled off. And that's exactly why this Human Rights Commission criticized Woodbridge's large lot zoning and exclusion of multifamily housing as policies that were driving up housing costs and keeping out low and moderate income families who were disproportionately Black and Hispanic. And there were calls and opportunities for Woodbridge to change throughout these years. In the 1980s, this zoning commission received 3 different applications for zoning amendments, which would have allowed some multifamily housing, not just duplexes, in that small area of the C and D districts. One of these applications was withdrawn after a 1981 public hearing where several residents voiced opposition. Then in 1982, an application that had been designed to materially assist in meeting regional housing needs got unanimously denied by the Zoning Commission, which then also denied a similar proposal in 1983. A few years after this, in 1986, the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, which, as I mentioned, is the state agency that's charged with enforcing anti-discrimination laws, it pointed again to multifamily bans, like Woodbridge's, as being exclusionary, finding that zoning regulations, which make it unfeasible for developers to build multifamily dwellings in the suburbs, have an adverse impact on many protected classes who can only afford to rent apartments. This is a form of discrimination. It is also a leading cause of the lack of supply of housing units. So it was clear how serious the exclusion was. And in 1991, this zoning commission did acknowledge that amendments to the state's Zoning Enabling Act, which had been adopted earlier that year, actually required local zoning regulations to encourage affordable housing and multifamily housing opportunities for all residents of the region. And that's a legal obligation, which we'll talk about more in just a few minutes. But what we see here in this acknowledgement is a moment of possibility to do the right thing. But what happened is a few years later, in 1994, this commission ended up unanimously denying a proposed zoning amendment that would have allowed some multifamily housing and helped create affordable units that were and still remain virtually non-existent in Woodbridge. Now, Woodbridge did make a change in 1996 when it added the section on affordable housing district developments. At that time, the Zoning Commission had taken notice of the fact that Woodbridge was nowhere near the target of 10% of units being affordable, which is the target that has been established by state law. And so this commission convened a study group to develop an amendment. And that process also could have been a moment for real change. But as my colleague, Mr. Yang, described, what ended up getting adopted was a completely unworkable provision that has never been used and has not been changed since its enactment 24 years ago. Now, Woodbridge also has a plan of conservation or development, or POCD, which is a 10-year plan that is supposed to promote the coordinated development of the municipality over time. And state law requires these plans to consider the need for affordable housing. And in 2004, as this commission was updating the POCD, it received a report from the South Central Regional Council of Governments, declaring a housing crisis with the need for affordable housing in the region at a critical point. But what this commission did is to write a letter back saying it is not the commission's opinion that housing is the problem. If a better business climate were cultivated, the housing problem could be better resolved. People with well-paying jobs can purchase houses. Now, notably, state law requires this commission's regulations to promote housing for both low and moderate income households, not opportunities that are restricted to people with well-paying jobs. And ultimately, Woodbridge's 2005 to 2015 POCD recommended a village district with mixed uses but no apartments. And in defiance of both the Regional Council of Governments and state law on POCDs, Woodbridge's plan had no recommendations about increasing housing opportunities in the residential districts. Woodbridge then updated the POCD again in 2015, and early on in that process, the Zoning Commission acknowledged that there was encouragement in the State Plan of Conservation and Development for high-density housing. And this commission also received reports from consultants about how housing prices have remained the highest in the area, and only 1.12% of Woodbridge units meet state affordability standards. And accordingly, the commission's draft POCD, the version that's from November 2014, it did actually acknowledge these problems. It stated specifically that fewer Black residents and members of other racial groups live in Woodbridge than elsewhere in the county or state. It said a majority of renters are unable to find affordable housing options. And it said that Woodbridge's unique demographics and housing stock pose current and potential future obstacles to affordability among particular groups, including renters, older residents, and low-income homeowners. And so in another moment of possibility, this November 2014 draft included some recommendations for slight increases in density, including the potential for higher density housing on the Country Club of Woodbridge property. But those recommendations and all of this language that you see here were deleted from the March 2015 version of the POCD that the commission adopted and which is still in place today. And the only reason to completely delete facts like these is either to ignore this reality or resist the changes that are needed to address it. And regarding the Country Club property, as many people here tonight might be aware, the town has rejected several proposals for housing development ever since the Board of Selectmen authorized the purchase of that Country Club property in 2009 to control its development. At the time, town officials very bluntly described the need for control specifically in order to block the construction of affordable housing. In the words of the town attorney at the time, you see the quote here on the screen from a 2009 annual town meeting. He said, "You do have zoning, and it does right now only permit single family dwellings. But I can assure you that after many years of fighting a whole host of affordable housing or denser developments, not myself, but reading about what's going on in a lot of towns, this is the kind of property that is prime for that. Woodbridge does not have affordable housing to speak of, and it has the potential services for this kind of development. So while your initial zoning will give you some comfort, you can look to some of your surrounding towns. Look to Orange. They face this time and again, and they fought for many, many years and spent a lot of money fighting it. And they have a lot of dense development in Orange because they couldn't reconcile it. So this purchase is to give you control of this property going forward." And so again, these are the words of a town official, and these are the lengths that Woodbridge has gone to stay exclusionary. And 11 years later, here we are tonight, and the Country Club property remains vacant and a source of debt for the town. Most recently, from around 2015 through 2019, this commission completed a comprehensive review and update of the zoning regulations. And the commission said at the very start of that process that it would make no changes to residential zones A and B, which, as you saw earlier, cover the vast majority of the town. But there were some draft regulations presented in February 2018 that would have allowed some multifamily dwellings by special exception. You see the proposal here on the slide. There would have been a proposed T4 zone to be located in the village district, but it might not come as a surprise to hear now that this proposal, despite support from some commissioners and residents, also faced increasingly hostile pushback and was removed because of that opposition. And, looking through old issues of the Woodbridge Town News, throughout this process, I've read so many op-eds across so many years saying that the zoning here should stay the same so that Woodbridge stays the same. But this status quo is unacceptable. For the people in South Central Connecticut who need affordable housing, which disproportionately means Black and Hispanic families, Woodbridge has been and remains walled off. And these statistics that I showed earlier are not accidental or random. In a state with a particularly stark racial wealth gap, Woodbridge's zoning restrictions over the decades have driven up housing costs, and these high costs exclude many Black and Hispanic families and keep Woodbridge whiter and wealthier than the surrounding region. And so when Woodbridge stays the same, Woodbridge stays segregated. And when Woodbridge and other towns like it all stay the same, the region stays segregated and the state stays segregated. It doesn't have to be this way. And as I've described, there have been several moments of possibility when members of this commission and other residents of the town have acknowledged the need for change and considered zoning proposals to move in the right direction. And so we wanted to make sure that this entire public hearing process is conducted with that zoning history in mind, because our proposed zoning amendment gives the town another chance to finally encourage the development of affordable multifamily dwellings and promote housing choice as the start of a new and more inclusive chapter. I'm now going to turn it over to Hannah Abelow to discuss why these changes are not just long overdue, but also legally necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now as well. All right, can everyone see my screen? Yeah. Thank you. My name is Hannah Abelow, and I'm also a student intern in the Jerome and Frank Legal Services Organization at 127 Wall Street in New Haven. So these changes that you've been hearing about don't just need to be made because it's the right thing to do or because of the zoning history that you've just heard about from Ms. Anderson. The current zoning is also illegal. It violates Connecticut's Zoning Enabling Act, it violates the state constitution, and it violates the state and federal Fair Housing Act. So the town must make changes in order to achieve greater compliance with these laws. I'm going to explain a little bit more about each of these. So the current Woodbridge zoning regulations violate Section 8-2, which you heard about from Chairman Klee at the beginning, of the Connecticut General Statutes. So that's otherwise known as the Zoning Enabling Act, and that requires the state's zoning power to be used to ensure housing opportunities for all. So under this act, Woodbridge is legally obligated to zone for the general welfare. It's widely accepted in Connecticut and elsewhere that that's what zoning does, that zoning must be done for the general welfare, and that doing so means zoning in a way that does not operate to exclude low and moderate income households and instead promotes the development of housing opportunities that are affordable. So that's true in Connecticut and that's true in other states as well. But in Connecticut, the statute goes further. Various express provisions of the Connecticut Zoning Enabling Act reinforce this fundamental duty. Since 1991, the Act has required zoning regulations to encourage the development of multifamily housing, to promote housing choice and economic diversity, including for low and moderate income households. Importantly, to our discussion here today, the statute also makes clear that this requirement is not limited to providing housing opportunities for those already living in Woodbridge. So in exercising that zoning power, and that power, remember, is given to the town by the state, towns are not licensed to act as islands unto themselves, right? So this power must be used to ensure housing opportunities for households, including low and moderate income households, that are living within the region, not just the town. Now, the statute doesn't specifically mention race, but we've been talking about race here tonight, and we got to bring it up. You've just heard from Ms. Anderson about the state's racial wealth gap. So in Connecticut, race and poverty are very closely related, and that can't be ignored. In the South Central region, Black households make an average of $42,000 a year, and Hispanic households make an average of $45,000 a year, while white households make the significantly higher average of $79,000 a year. So the requirements to zone for economic diversity and for the region as a whole are also, in effect, requirements to zone for racial diversity. Woodbridge has failed in its obligations under the Zoning Enabling Act. So regional need for affordable housing is well documented. Recall our earlier discussion of the town's current assisted housing stock. The dearth of affordable units in Woodbridge is indisputable, right? 13 is what you saw when Mr. Yang presented that on the screen. But despite this unmet need, Woodbridge continues to ban true multifamily dwellings in all zones and to put forth a demonstrably unusable affordable housing regulation as its only path to affordable units. So it's not just the Zoning Enabling Act that is being violated here. It's not the only state law that we want to talk about. We also want to talk about the Connecticut Constitution and the Connecticut Constitution's ban on segregation. So every state bans discrimination. Connecticut also bans discrimination, like all those other states, but it then goes a step further. The Connecticut Constitution specifically outlaws segregation, and it requires affirmative dismantling of segregation wherever it is found. Now, you've already heard tonight that Woodbridge and the broader region are extremely racially segregated. A recent ProPublica article aptly stated, and I'm going to quote now, that housing segregation is a national trend, but Connecticut is somewhat ahead of the pack. The article also noted that Black and Hispanic residents statewide live in some of the nation's most segregated neighborhoods. So the town of Woodbridge is disproportionately white compared with the rest of the region. Despite its location in the extremely diverse New Haven County, a whopping 74.8% of Woodbridge population is white, non-Hispanic, and a mere 2.7% is Black, non-Hispanic, and a mere 5.6% is Hispanic only. So I think the years and years of exclusionary zoning policies in Woodbridge have directly contributed to this segregation within the broader region. So Woodbridge's ban on multifamily housing, it locks out members of communities of color. It denies them access to what we all know to be Woodbridge's town amenities and opportunities here in Woodbridge. So as a state actor, however, Woodbridge is required to take steps to remedy this segregation. In addition to the Constitution and the Zoning Enabling Act, we also wanted to talk about the Fair Housing Act. And so the current Woodbridge zoning regulations also violate the Fair Housing Act, the Federal Fair Housing Act, and the Connecticut Fair Housing Act on theories of both disparate impact and segregative effect. So on that first, I'll talk first about that first prong, which is the disparate impact prong. So for disparate impact, the Fair Housing Act specifically provides, and I have it up here on the screen, that it shall be unlawful to otherwise make unavailable. So I want to talk about that, make unavailable or deny a dwelling to any person because of race, color, religion, sex, familial status, or national origin. The town's exclusionary zoning do just that. They make housing unavailable with a disparate impact on Black and Hispanic communities in the region. On that second prong, segregative effect, the regulations also violate the Fair Housing Act by reinforcing and perpetuating segregation in the region. I won't go into that again because we just talked about segregation and we talked about the Constitution. Segregation would, however, decrease if the regulations were amended to allow reasonable, affordable, multifamily developments within the town's boundaries. So that's just a little bit about the legal issues with the current zoning, the zoning as it stands today. We think this body should take immediate steps to bring the town's zoning ordinance into compliance with the Zoning Enabling Act, the Connecticut Constitution, the Fair Housing Act, both the Connecticut Fair Housing Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act. And we think that to achieve full compliance and give what is due to the enormous societal issues at stake, that longer term, there'll need to be mid-range and long-range steps to accommodate the town's fair share of the regional affordable housing needs. But today, tonight, this time, swift action must be taken. And to that end, we've proposed an amendment that is ready. It could be put in place tonight, it could be put in place right now. And that amendment to the zoning regulation would do much to remedy these violations. John Ling Zhu will now give you an overview of that proposed regulation.
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, could you also give me the ability to share screen?
Doesn't want to go to you. Hang on a sec.
Okay, I see it now. Thank you again. My name is Shanli Xu. I'm also a student intern with the Jerome and Frank Legal Services Organization at 127 Wall Street in New Haven. I will walk you through our proposed text amendment to the Woodbridge zoning regulations. This is on page 123 on our submission package. So the purpose of this amendment is to begin Woodbridge's prohibitions on multifamily and affordable housing in all residential districts in Woodbridge, namely zoning districts A, B, T3C, T3D, and T3BB. Our amendment seeks to remove the ban on multifamily and is guided by two principles. First, to minimize how this is different from the existing zoning. Just as Attorney Boggs said in the beginning, we are focused on removing ban on multifamily housing, and we are not for now seeking to address other issues that might exist in this code. Second, to require affordability. With respect to the first principle, subsections E to G requires all the multifamily structures to be consistent with the current bulk and architectural regulations. Therefore, these homes would be very similar to the current single-family homes from the outside. They would be comparable in size, lot coverage, exterior design, and use of material, except that they will allow more families to live in them and they will be more affordable. Moreover, just as the current single-family homes, opportunity housing constructed under this section should comply with the requirements under Public Health Code with respect to sewer and water as required by the zoning regulations. Regarding the second principle, subsection B outlines our three affordability options, and developers of multifamily homes must choose one of them to apply to a portion of the housing. Again, we are proposing inclusionary developments that allow developers to make a reasonable profit while also requiring that a portion of the units are affordable. So developers, they should either preserve a portion of the housing for at least 40 years for sale or rental to a household earning 60% of the median income or less. Or they should lease a portion of the housing to household receiving rental assistance, or to develop a housing that receives financial assistance from government for low and moderate income housing. The regulation also builds in reporting and enforcement mechanisms required regarding affordability, fair housing, and fair marketing. So the multifamily homes we are planning for Second Orchard Road will utilize the second option. Of the 4 units in total, 2 will be leased to families receiving Section 8 rental assistance. Upon your adoption of our zoning amendment, interested parties could construct opportunity housing like the development we plan to build at 2 Orchard Road upon issuance of a zoning permit. The amendment would require applicants to submit an affordability plan in addition to the documents typically required for a zoning permit, as detailed in subsection H of the proposal. So to sum up, our amendment requires a developer of opportunity housing to comply with all the existing requirements in the zoning regulations and to utilize one of the 3 affordability options. To apply for the zoning permit, the developer should submit an affordability plan. In addition to this zoning amendment, we are also proposing a text amendment to the Woodbridge Plan of Conservation and Development, or POCD. I'll hand it over to my colleague Patrick Holland, who will walk you through our proposed amendment to the Woodbridge POCD. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Holland. I'm a student intern with the Jerome N. Frank Legal Services Organization at 127 Wall Street in New Haven. Our proposed changes to the Woodbridge zoning regulations are an essential first step in making this town accessible for all who want to live here, but it's only a first step. Woodbridge must go further if it is to fully comply with state law and live up to its own purported values. In addition to zoning changes, we have proposed amendments to the town's Plan of Conservation and Development, or POCD, to help guide Woodbridge's long-term growth. Woodbridge is currently shirking its obligation to adopt a POCD that provides for sufficient affordable housing, which is in violation of Section 8-23 of the Connecticut General Statutes. If our amendment is adopted, the town's new POCD would show that it is committed to providing housing options for families with low to moderate incomes, and also consequently bring Woodbridge in compliance with this statute. So a POCD's purpose is first and foremost to set forth a common vision for the future of a community and determine policies that will help it reach that goal. These documents, which are updated, at least once every 10 years or so, describe new potential land use patterns and development priorities. While POCDs are not binding on the towns or regions that they govern, they do provide an important touchstone that governments can always return to while making decisions about their zoning practices. Section 8-23 of the Connecticut General Statutes requires Woodbridge to weigh a number of factors when it's preparing its POCD. So first, Woodbridge really must consider the need for affordable housing. It must also make provision for the development of housing opportunities, including opportunities for multifamily dwellings, for all residents of the municipality and the planning region in which that municipality is located. It must also promote housing choice and economic diversity in housing, including housing for both low and moderate income households. And finally, it must take into account the state's and the South Central Regional Council of Governments POCDs, both of which prioritize the development of multifamily and affordable housing. So I think it should be fairly clear by now that Woodbridge's current POCD does not do a good job of complying with these requirements whatsoever. In the rest of this part of the presentation, I really want to briefly highlight the improvements Woodbridge rejected when it was writing its 2015 POCD. Then I'll detail our proposed POCD amendment. Before I do this, however, I want to make it very clear that the POCD and zoning regulation amendments are two separate items that can be considered by the Commission independent of one another. The zoning regulation amendment can and should be adopted regardless of whether the POCD amendments are adopted or approved. Despite the fact that the current POCD makes minimal efforts to promote housing choice and economic diversity, our amendment to allow multifamily housing in residential zones is not inconsistent with the current document. The POCD at the end of the day is only really an advisory document, so zoning regulations do not have to align with its text precisely. But even if this were not the case, multiple portions of the 2015 POCD do suggest a strong need for denser multifamily housing. Actually, the current POCD notes that Woodbridge, quote, could see a decline in population of several hundred residents, end quote, over the next 10 years of the plan's adoption. It also notes that there's a potential for a decline in the number of school-age children as well. This insinuates that new multifamily homes wouldn't stress Woodbridge population much and could actually even help maintain the currently shrinking populations that Woodbridge has. Additionally, the document indicates that Woodbridge's many large homes are out of balance with shrinking households and families. So right now, more than half of homes in town have at least 4 bedrooms, while actually only a quarter of households have 4 or more people, which is stunning. Residents will soon seek smaller homes that are more affordable and very easy to maintain. Thus, while the current POCD is inadequate, we'd say it is not directly in conflict with our zoning amendment. So in 2011, as my colleague, Ms. Anderson, has already detailed, the Planning and Zoning Commission considered allowing denser housing developments on certain parcels outside of the village district. And it also recognized the state POCD advised that towns ought to adjust their zoning regulations to build multifamily housing. Ultimately, as a result of this, the town hired consultants who pushed for changes in the POCD that would have improved housing access for working class families in the town. But despite the pro-affordability recommendations of the town's consultants, the draft 2015 POC presented for public review contained just a few minor points addressing affordability. This version of the POCD would have encouraged some accessory dwelling units and extended the boundaries of the village district, which would have permitted more as-of-right duplexes in the town. The draft also included provisions encouraging denser, yet still age-restricted developments. These recommendations would have done little to increase the number of affordable housing options in Woodbridge. None of these recommendations would have even touched the most important zone in Woodbridge, which we've continually talked about, which is Residential District A. It wouldn't have changed in any significant way. And these reforms were also not primarily aimed at providing housing for older primarily aimed at providing housing for older residents and individuals without children. They weren't aimed at families with children who clearly have the greatest need for affordable housing. In short, they were insufficient to meet the requirements of 8-23. Yet, even these minor changes and recommendations were too much for certain Woodbridge residents who pressured the commission into rejecting the proposed POCD. The adopted documents cut mention of an affordable housing crisis in Woodbridge, and it also watered down language stating the objective fact that there are fewer Black residents in Woodbridge than elsewhere in the region. Given the opportunity to allow accessory dwelling units, Woodbridge chose only to allow restricted in-law apartments. Given the opportunity to allow affordable multifamily homes, Woodbridge would not even approve active adult communities in Resident District A. The bottom line is that whenever the town was given the opportunity to embrace affordability and inclusivity, it chose exclusivity. These changes took a draft POC that was already weak and didn't really comply with 8-23 and stripped it of its few improvements to the status quo. So our proposed POCD would begin to chart a new course for Woodbridge. This course would be consistent with the goals of the state and the idea that Woodbridge should be a welcoming community for all. It goes beyond the previous draft POCD and seeks to meet the requirements laid out in Section 8-23. It makes provision for the development of housing opportunity. It recognizes regional housing needs, the need for housing choice, and the goals of economic diversity. It would also encourage Woodbridge to rezone the town to allow multifamily housing across all residential districts. Details of our proposal can be found on page 5 and 6 of the package that we've submitted to the Planning and Zoning Commission. In summary, our amendments would specifically add language to the POCD advising that Woodbridge adopt the zoning regulations amendment that we have proposed tonight. That's what you see on this slide before you. They would also make modifications to the POCD's future land use categories list to reflect the fact that two-family and multifamily opportunity housing should be allowed town-wide in residential zones at low densities, and higher density multifamily opportunity housing should be allowed in the village district. That's what you see on this slide. So I'd like to close by reiterating that while it's important for Woodbridge to change its POCD in order to comply with Section 8-23, our proposed zoning amendment does not directly conflict with the current POCD. The Commission can accept our zoning amendment without accepting our POCD amendments. Our proposed POCD amendments are simple. They would commit Woodbridge to low-density multifamily opportunity housing town-wide and higher density opportunity housing in the Village District. They would send Woodbridge down the path to truly embracing the goals of housing opportunity set out in the authorizing statute and finally bring it closer towards compliant with Section 8-23 of the Connecticut General Statute. So now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mr. Kemper, who will show you all our immediate proposal for new homes at 2 Orchard Road. And I'll be running this PowerPoint. So Mr. Kemper, you can start when you'd like to.
I don't have him in as a person to speak, so hang on. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good evening, Jack Kemper, Kemper Associates Architects, by far the oldest presenter so far tonight. And I want to talk, Patrick, if you could put the site, thank you. Our charge was to design 4 units to look and feel like a regular suburban house. You can see the site plan. In beige is the footprint of the house. It's centered in the yard, driveway off Orchard Road. It's designed with within the setbacks. It's got good distances. You can see it's kind of in the middle of the lot. The septic system is out to the front. It's designed for 8 bedrooms. This is 4 townhouses, one bedroom, 1 3-bedroom, and 2 2-bedrooms. So the total is 8 bedrooms. So that is the size of the septic system and the reserve shown on the site plan. Patrick, if you want to go to the next one. What I really tried to do is to make this look like a typical single-family house. It's got the main mass with the front door in the middle, window on each side, sort of the midsection, which is usually end up being a family room or a mud room in this size house. And then the final unit is roughly the size of a garage on a single family house. So the massing, it really matches the look of a single family house. And we're working with traditional materials, siding, shingles, trim, everything you would see on a single family house. We've worked hard to get the entries away from each other, so you never see 4 doors in a row. And really, the bottom line is this looks like a single family house. You see the front elevation and the back elevation. If Patrick, you want to go to the sides are a little more simple, but we have an entry on either side. So we never see 4 entries at the same time. And the last slide is the roof plan, which is fairly technical. Oh, no, the plans. Yeah, sorry. The roof plan shows how we manipulate the massing of these units to get the big section, the main section on the right, the midsection, and the smaller section on the left. And Patrick, if you want to go back a little bit, the plans all meet all requirements. All have all egress. There's a first floor bedroom unit on the extreme right. That's the 3-bedroom unit. All the units will have basements so they can have storage. So they're really made to be real houses, just smaller, which was our intention. So we work with Tony D'Onofrio, the builder, and I think Tony's going to speak next to its affordability.
Hi, Mrs. Sullivan. Can you grant Tony D'Onofrio access to speak? Thank you.
Should be in there.
Have you heard?
Yep.
Hello?
You're there.
You hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Tony Denorfia. And Jack, I think I might have you by a year or two. But we'll see as being the oldest presenter. I'm a Connecticut home builder. I've been a Connecticut home builder since 1981. Our company is A. Denorfia Building and Development, LLC. We're located at 133 Main Street, Southington, Connecticut. As far as professionally, I'm active in the local, state, and national Home Builders and Remodelers Association. I'm the past president of the Central Connecticut Home Builders Remodelers Association. I'm presently on the board of directors of both the state and the Central Connecticut Home Builders and Remodelers Association. Over the last almost 40 years, it'll be 40 years next year, we've constructed approximately 1,500 housing units. We're a small company. It's just myself and my three sons. Primarily single-family homes, but with a pretty good mix of multifamily, including duplexes. We built several three-families and things like that. As part of our business model over that time, what we did was we have constructed and accumulated a bunch of housing units. Presently, we have about 200 housing units. And what they are is they're a mix of duplex houses, again, a couple of three-story buildings that are active adult. And our largest complex is 50 units. I didn't know until recently that we build and hold. They have a name for it now. It's called a missing middle. And that missing middle is that we do not have, builders are out there, they're building the big complexes, the big affordable complexes, and they're building the single family and maybe a duplex here and there, but there's nothing in the middle. And maybe that's why I was approached at the beginning of this year by the applicant to see if I would be interested in constructing, purchasing, and managing the contemplated development at 2 Orchard Road. They gave us the rough parameters and asked, can we build it within the bulk requirements? Can we meet the public health needs as far as the septic well and items like that? We took a go at it in the office. We looked at those different items. Preliminary perk tests were done. We did a preliminary layout in the office to make sure that the home could be constructed in a reasonable fashion. And then at that point in time, it was turned over to Jack Kemper, who then had to add the bells and whistles to make sure that it would fit within the development. We researched it. We came up with the design. We got our preliminary cost analysis. And I guess the bottom line is, can we build this and can we make it an active part in the community and something that can be built there? Yes, we would be more than interested in building this, maintaining it, adding it to our portfolio and renting it with our family. We think it would do well to do something like that. And that's would end my presentation, okay? Unless you have any questions.
Patrick, are you turning this over to Don Poland now?
Yes, Don is up next.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Donald Poland. I'm a planning consultant based in Stafford Springs, Connecticut. I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant, and we'll be presenting on both the plan of conservation development and the zoning regs. Brief introduction, my qualifications. I've been a planner for over 25 years. My consulting practice has spanned 18 states and over 100 communities. I'm accepted as an expert witness in the areas of land use planning, neighborhood redevelopment, and community development in U.S. District Court, Eastern District of Louisiana. Also accepted in the areas of land use planning in the state of Missouri circuit courts. And I have extensive experience working on housing and affordable housing development with both developers and municipalities. Recently wrapped up housing needs assessments for 2 municipalities in Connecticut, and I'm working on an affordable housing plan for another municipality at this time. The aim of my testimony tonight is really twofold. One is to demonstrate how the Woodbridge zoning regulations and plan of conservation and development have created a landscape of exclusion by restricting and prohibiting a diversity of housing, specifically multifamily housing. In addition, to show the proposed amendments to the zoning regs and to the POCD to allow multifamily residential structures as of right in single-family use districts would not harm the character of districts, community, or property values. To accomplish this, I go through an evaluation of the POCD and then also a discussion about zoning historically up until now, and then look at some of the specifics of the conceptual development. In doing so, I'll demonstrate the POCD's failure to address housing affordability and equality, that the POD privileges middle-class ideals over social and economic diversity and equity, equality, the system of land use planning, how it conflates along with system of land use planning and zoning conflate use, density, and intensity. I think this is extremely important, and I speak specifically to it on 2 slides later on. And then zoning excludes multifamily housing, resulting in disparate impacts on low-income households, which also results in socioeconomic and racial segregation. So the comprehensive plan, I'm not going to focus a lot here, just quickly, because my colleagues have presented so thoroughly on it previously. But essentially, it's a physical land use plan for the spatial organization of the community, including density. Through the planning process, when you're creating it, you do analysis of physical, demographic, economic, conservation issues. And then ultimately, it's this process of laying out kind of 3 things. First, what are the things, the natural resources we want to protect? What are the areas available for residential, commercial, industrial development, and to what density do we want to develop them? And then ultimately, what are the infrastructures and community facilities we need to support the development that we're trying to achieve? And we see here your future land use plan on the right-hand side, dominated by the single-family residential development and also dominated by open space and environmental conservation. I want to make clear that there's a symbiotic relationship between the POCD and the zoning regs. That ultimately the POCD is the document that provides the policy or planning policies to inform ultimately the zoning regulations. But at the same time, zoning itself, existing zoning, informs decisions being made for the land use plan. So therefore, this map on the right kind of shows how zoning informs land use, but land use also, the land use planning also informs zoning and what we do moving forward. So in reviewing Woodbridge's POCD, it reveals a land use system that is utilized as a means of producing a pattern of exclusion based on the production of low density, rural, and residential aesthetic. I'll talk more about this as we go through this, but essentially this aesthetic is produced through the community valuing and prioritizing natural resources, open space, history, and environmental sustainability, mainly to exclude or at the exclusion of higher density multifamily residential development. In doing so, the collective result, intentional or not, is the Woodbridge POCD policies become a euphemism for exclusion. And essentially, I'll go through and look at some examples of that in the POCD over the next few slides. But showing here on the right-hand side from your POCD, a racial composition of your population, 80% white, 87% white in 2010, 9% Asian, and then your Black and African populations coming in down around 2%, same with, I believe, Hispanic populations. We can see that exclusion and how it's resulted over time. So looking at the POCD, early on in the POCD in your housing section, it talks about housing and affordable housing need. There's statements like a need for additional housing units or high housing costs pose affordability challenges. But when you get to the end of that section where you have your housing action plan, it actually fails to address these items. There are no, specific or proactive strategies to address housing need and affordability. If you look at the Woodbridge Village, there's recommendations related to land use, related to mixed use, and so forth. But then when you go to the zoning regulations to see what's been implemented or can you do these things in these land use kind of areas, we find that the zoning regulations for mixed use are highly restrictive and will unlikely yield residential units. In addition, we also find that the area is so small, even if residential units were yielded under the zoning regulations, they'd really have no impact on housing need or housing affordability. It's also important to note, I always pay close attention to narratives and vocabularies. This portion of the plan specifically says density in form of such condominiums over critical uses. To me, that's one of those words that jumps out at me. Condominiums are about ownership, not about rental. We're showing this kind of privileging for ownership over rental and kind of avoiding that need for not just multifamily developments or mixed use residential, but also from rental units. The transportation section of the plan talks about that none of the bus stops on the public roads include shelters for waiting riders, furthering discouraging transit use. This is one of those things that comes up a lot in POCDs. It's very important from a transportation system, but we also know in the context of transportation that low-income households are most reliant on access to public transportation. It's also one of those things that's really easy for a plan to kind of take care of. Just come up with an action item that says, design and build bus shelters to provide for those people that need access to public transit. But it doesn't do that. The action plan ultimately favors sidewalks, bike routes, ride sharing, people with automobiles, not people on transit, and scenic road designations, which gets back to this aesthetic. So these items are more associated with middle and upper class aesthetics of place and planning than providing opportunity and serving the needs of lower income households. So the sewer and septic discussion. In my work with communities across Connecticut and elsewhere, typically the discussion of sewers is around capacity and the either constraints to adding capacity, challenges, or the need to add capacity to better serve the community, especially in communities that want to encourage development, commercial development, multifamily development, and especially mixed-use development. In your POCD, it just talks about residents who are not served by the sewer system rely on on-site sewage disposal septic systems. The large lot sizes mandated by the town's residential A zoning restriction help to ensure for adequate leachate systems and dispersing of sewage and surrounding soils. There's actually no infrastructure discussion around sewers, the consideration to expand sewer lines, to add capacity, and so forth. So Woodbridge could confront the need for housing and the challenge for affordable housing, which is stated early in the plan, by extending sewer lines and ensuring adequate capacity, but it doesn't. It makes no attempt to do so. And through silence, the POCD perpetuates the status quo of exclusion. Sustainability really jumped out at me. It's a popular catch term these days. It's hard to find a plan without the phrase sustainability in it. For those of us who understand sustainability, we recognize that it's kind of a three-legged stool that includes social, environmental, and economic aspects. And the Woodbridge POCD ultimately cites the most recognized definition for sustainability, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That comes from the Brundtland Commission report, a United Nations report in 1987. But what's key, and if we look at the last sentence here, after that definition that the Woodbridge POCD uses, it says doing so must integrate and balance economic, environmental, and social goals. The fact is, the Woodbridge plan, in considering sustainability, ignores social and economic aspects of sustainability. It only focuses on environmental sustainability. Kind of this idea, so long as we protect the environment, we get a pass on the other stuff. But in doing so, even in looking at the environment and protecting the environment, it even fails to confront the kind of environmental impacts that low-density suburban sprawl create. Over-reliance on the automobile, large carbon footprint, and excessive land consumption through large lot sizes. These things are avoided, privileging, once again, kind of the environment over development. To the POCD, some conclusions. The examples provide a glimpse into a conveniently produced aesthetic of community, a pattern of exclusion that prioritizes natural resources, open spaces, and environmental sustainability over social justice and the need for social justice and economic exclusion. The aesthetics of land use planning is a euphemism for exclusion that perpetuate the status quo of inequality, and the pattern of exclusion is further reinforced in the zoning regulations. Your introductory section to the zoning regulations talks about the things that were considered and prioritized, and ultimately, once again, puts right out there, protecting natural resources, protecting existing properties and neighborhoods, and limiting this ability for any change, maintaining the status quo, privileging the environment over the built environment, the natural environment over the built environment. So with zoning, I want to go back in time a bit, and I want this piece to be a little more educational to then bring us to a context of understanding some of what's being proposed here. And that is, so to understand land use, specifically the similarities or differences between single family and multifamily land use, we need to better understand zoning in its aim. My point here is the idea of opening up single family residential zones to multifamily development. We need to gain a better understanding of that. So zoning is the legal authority, as we all know, to regulate use, density, intensity of land. It's the police powers of government seeking to protect public health, safety, general welfare. American zoning originated in the early 20th century and was established as a primary means of regulating land use in the 1920s. It separated incompatible uses, but also enforced social and economic segregation. It's a progressive era planning tool that emerged as a reaction to the harsh and undesirable conditions of the American industrial city, zoning as a means of confronting the noxious conditions and uncontrollable urban development. So basic premise of zoning or basic authorities, authorizing municipality to regulate height, number of stories, size of buildings, percentage of lot coverage. We all get this, we know this, it's the bulk and area requirements of zoning. And ultimately also then the use of building structures for trade, for industry, residence, and other purposes. That's the other side of zoning, we get to regulate use. Unfortunately, I think we often conflate these, and I'll get to that a bit later. So reaction against the harsh conditions of the industrial city, the purpose of zoning, lessen congestion in the streets, secure from safety, fire, panic, and other dangers, promote health and general welfare, provide for adequate light and air. I'll let you read the rest, but this is language that was in the original federal enabling legislation, ultimately still exists within Section 8-2 today, and provides a guidance for kind of what it is we're trying to accomplish with zoning. And we see here some of the harsh conditions of the city of the past. We've moved a century on. It's a century later, and few, if any of us actually anymore, live in fear of fire, panic, or other dangers, nor do we suffer from a lack of adequate light or air. Zoning, along with other codes, has essentially mitigated the negative effects of the industrial city. And it prevented the emergence of such negative conditions in many of the post-World War II American suburbs. By dividing municipalities into districts, segregation of incompatible uses, and regulating density and intensity of development, zoning mitigated these conditions. For example, we no longer have slaughterhouses next to residential houses. So that condition is gone. That needs to be put in context in kind of today. What are we regulating in today's urban realm, in today's Woodbridge or other communities, if we don't have the slaughterhouse, and if our multifamily residential looks like this rather than tenements? So another provision in zoning, which was the last bullet on the previous page, addresses kind of the character of the district, particular suitability of uses with a view to conserving value of buildings. And this is an area that I do a lot of work in, especially when I'm representing developers, because communities are always concerned about the impact on property value. The view to conserving buildings was originally aimed at protecting the value of buildings from harm from proximate and neighboring noxious uses. Today, the view of conserving value has been distorted as an economic value of aesthetics. This is highlighted once again in the introductory system section of your zoning regulations, where it recognizes the appearance of property has direct bearing on economic value, and that the appearance of a single property affects not only surrounding properties, but the cumulative effect is to enhance or diminish the beauty of the town. We return once again to this aesthetics of zoning, not this kind of we're trying to, solve for the harsh conditions and so forth. So zoning has too often been a tool of social, economic, and racial exclusion. Over the past half century or more, it's been well established that the power to zone does not provide license to exclude. Social, economic, or racial exclusion are not within the authority of protecting the general welfare. And for nearly 30 years since Section 8-2, nearly 30 years, Section 8-2 of the general statutes has explicitly required zoning to be inclusive, including to also encourage development of housing opportunities, including multifamily housing and so forth, and promoting housing choice and economic diversity. So we're required to do that. So understanding this origins and kind of this evolution of this leaning towards the aesthetics in the environment, all of this helps us to understand kind of this idea of residential land uses and the permitting of multifamily, or in this context, a conceptual design of a 4-unit dwelling in single-family residential districts. So far removed from the industrial city of the past, zoning has evolved into a complex regulatory system of land use that over-conceptualizes differences in use, exaggerating threats posed by density and intensity, and overemphasizing the potential impact of property value for the purpose of exclusion. So to use that conceptual development at 2 Orchard Road, I want you to think about use. The fact is, there is no difference in the use of a building that contains 1 unit or 1 residential dwelling or 4 residential dwellings. The use of the building, regardless of the number of dwellings, even if it's 100 dwellings, is residential. The density changes, but the only difference in density in this example is a modest change from 1 unit per 1.5 acres to 4 units per 1.5 acres, or a unit per 0.375 acres. You'll see on another slide a totally reasonable density. Intensity, the only difference in the intensity of the site being designed is to be designed to accommodate parking. rather than a single family house that may be designed for, 2 to 5 parking spaces, depending on the size, number of garages and so forth. This will be designed with 9 parking spaces to accommodate 4 residential units. That's not a dramatic change in intensity. In property value, there'll be no negative effect on property value. And I know most commissions just react like, how is that possible? There is study after study after study showing that residential uses adjacent to residential uses do not impact property value. Great study by the MIT Center for Research in 2005 looked at 7 affordable housing developments in 6 communities across Metro Boston over a 15-year period, and showed, and these were anywhere from 20% to 100% affordable, showed no impact on value pre, during, or after development of neighboring properties. So understanding that use, density, and intensity are different site development characteristics unfolds a better understanding of interpreting land use and zoning. The use of the conceptual site will not substantially change, or the use on a different, multifamily development will not substantially change. The change in density and intensity are ultimately nuanced. So here I say, density is subjective. There are no correct densities for communities. Communities are viable at many densities. That's why we have very low density, rural communities, all the way up to very high density urban communities. And they are all viable in different ways. It's not density that's at issue. That's a subjective matter on our part. The intensity is also subjective, but ultimately that's what zoning is designed to deal with. Ensuring that parking is designed and parking is adequate, and that turn radiuses and lines of sight when exiting and accessing the property are met, and therefore not creating a safety hazard. And I'm quite confident 9 parking spaces on a residential lot will not create a safety hazard. So recognizing that Woodbridge does not live in fear of fire, panic, or other dangers, nor suffering from lack of adequate light or air, it is not plausible. It is not plausible that a change from 1 unit per 1.5 acres to say 0.375 acres per unit will harm the public health, safety, or welfare, or will disrupt the character of the district or diminish the property value. To claim as such is really nothing more than an unfounded and emotional response to change. The fact is, I looked at a number of other wealthy suburban communities, North Haven and West Hartford, and you see residential densities, minimum lot sizes of 6,000, 7,000, 12,000, 15,000 square feet. 4 units per 1.5 acres comes out to 16,000 square feet. This is totally within the realm of what suburban communities actually have. So is there a threat here to public health, safety, and welfare or value? No. So some conclusions. Zoning has evolved into a complex system that too often conflates and distorts use, density, intensity. Similar and marginal differences in density and intensity are wrongly assumed to pose threats to the character of zoning districts or to property values. Contemporary zoning is highly restrictive land use system aimed at controlling or preserving the aesthetics of place, constraining the available supply of land, ultimately the supply of housing, and artificially inflates, not conserving the value of buildings and properties. This highly restrictive system is key driver to housing affordability and is at the core of Woodbridge's zoning regulations that perpetuate and promote a landscape of exclusion. Your median home value, median home sales value, and your median household income tell the story. You have a median household income of $140,000. You need approximately $150,000 to access the median sales value of a single-family residential home at $478,000. Social and economic exclusion ultimately translate into segregation and racial exclusion. So last slide. Woodbridge zoning regulations, landscape of exclusion, how social, economic, and racial exclusion are fostered through the Woodbridge zoning regulations. Single-family residential dwellings at a minimum lot size of 1.5 acres or higher based on other requirements, as was shown earlier, are the dominant land use and housing product in Woodbridge. That creates a very high cost of entry into the community and into the housing market. Multifamily, 4 units or more residential dwellings are not allowed in any zoning district other than the age-restricted housing, the mixed-use development, and mixed-use development in limited areas with highly restrictive provisions. 2-family residential dwellings are limited to less than 0.2% of the total land area of the community. And as discussed earlier, the affordable housing provision is highly restrictive and has never been used. It will not yield affordable housing in any meaningful amounts. Excessive and restrictive site and building design requirements disproportionately apply to 2-family and mixed-use residential dwellings, and excessive permitting requirements for site plan and special exception applications disproportionately impact 2-family and mixed-use residential dwellings. The fact is, overall, the regulations prohibit the inclusion of a diversity of housing stock and the inclusion of a diversity of residents. I thank you for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Poland. This is Erin Boggs again, and I'm just going to wrap things up. In this day and age, we know that continued disparities in housing opportunity due to race and wealth are unacceptable. This is not and should not be a controversial statement. But despite this, over a long history, Woodbridge has constructed a wall between itself and the outside world. The first select woman recently and commendably spoke out about the racial justice movement that swept the country this summer. She wrote, "Our town has an opportunity to participate in a movement that crosses racial, ethnic, political, and intergenerational differences. A movement that binds us together by our common humanity. A moment poised to inspire new policies and new legislation. We take these words as inspiration. We come before you today to ask that the town of Woodbridge live up to these ideals and seize the moment. After decades of exclusion, there is still time to right the wrongs of the past. With our proposal, you have the opportunity to take the first step towards a new and open Woodbridge. Thank you. We are very interested to hear your comments and propose responding to questions as part of our rebuttal."
So thank you, Attorney Boggs. This is Rob Klee. And thank you to all the presenters for your presentation. A housekeeping note, if you could make sure that your presentations are submitted to Chris Sullivan in electronic format so they can be part of the public hearing record, that would be really appreciated. So next, I know we have quite a few members of the public that have been patiently waiting, so I propose that we move now to the public comment portion of our hearing to give them a chance to talk. Now, Chris and Betsy, I am assuming WebEx is close enough to Zoom that folks can raise their hand in some fashion or another.
Yes, this is Betsy Agla. So if you are on a computer or you're accessing the meeting through a smartphone, you will see a small icon of a hand. And if you click on that hand, you will be indicating that you'd like a turn to speak. And I will do my best to go in the order that I see hands come up. And I'll be able to unmute people so that they can share their comments.
Great, Betsy, thank you for that. And while folks are starting to raise their hands, I just want to offer just some real brief comments for our members of the public. So the purpose of a public hearing is to actually to listen to the comments from the public. You'll each have up to 3 minutes or so for your brief statements. So those are entered into our official record. And when you do so, please state your name. And if you're comfortable, please add your address again for the record. So our members of our Planning and Zoning Commission and the applicants are not going to be answering the questions that you raise. This is not how public comment works. We're just receiving your public comments into the record. So even if you ask, we're not going to answer. Your public statements, your written comments as well are part of that public record and will be considered as the Planning and Zoning Commission considers this application. As a gentle reminder to everyone, off-the-record communication with any members of the commission on the merits of this application is prohibited. So please, this is your opportunity here in this public hearing process to make your voice heard and get your comments into the record. And I'd like for folks to try to focus on the subject matter that is within the scope of the commission, generally under our Connecticut general statutes, which I mentioned at the beginning. And again, try to keep your comments brief and focused on the text amendments that are actually presented by our applicants, and try to avoid unreasonable repetition so we can all hear all the concerns of all of you and your neighbors. So with that, I welcome Betsy to bring our folks forward one at a time, and I will run my 3-minute clock as people come up.
All right, the first person in line here, so to speak, is John Zeke. John, I've just unmuted you.
Hi, this is John Zeke, and I live on Burma Road. And I'd like to ask the commission, I know they're not answering, but my question is, you draw the equation between affordable housing and multifamily, and I don't understand that equation. There's a large section of property right now that's available for sale down in the flat. That area has access to public water, public sewer, public transportation. And why wouldn't a large parcel of property in that area of town with public utilities available be available to build small, affordable, single-family homes? So that's really, why is there a relationship that you're drawing, or what is the relationship that's being drawn between affordable housing and multi? Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for that comment. Betsy, who is our next person with a question?
Thank you. The next person is Jean Molat. But before I unmute them, I just should have mentioned earlier that once you're done speaking, please unraise your hand by clicking on the hand icon again. So, Jean, you're up now.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Jean Malo. I live at 60 Dillon Road in Woodbridge. I have lived in Woodbridge with my husband and 2 children for almost 20 years. Both our son and daughter attended Beecher Road School, Amity Middle School Bethany, and Amity High School. I have been the math specialist at Beecher for almost 16 years. As both a parent and a teacher, I think I have a valuable perspective to offer regarding the application for a zoning regulation amendment and an amendment to the Town Plan of Conservation and Development. I fully support this application. Here are a few reasons why. First, I believe the town of Woodbridge would benefit from efforts to increase racial and economic diversity. Before moving to Woodbridge in 2001, we lived in New Haven, where my daughter Maddie attended a preschool with students and faculty members of many different backgrounds. In early September of the following year, on one of the first days that she attended kindergarten at Beecher, I picked Maddie up from school and she asked me, "Where are all the dark-skinned people, Mommy?" She was 5, but she had already noticed a difference. I have never forgotten her words. Having taught in several racially and economically diverse schools, both public and private, in New York City and Brooklyn, I know firsthand that children and young adults are better served when their classmates and teachers reflect a range of races, income levels, religions, and backgrounds. Children are naturally curious, and when they interact with others who may have had a different upbringing, who may celebrate different holidays, wear different kinds of clothing, have relatives from different countries, and or have parents who work in different industries, what they learn from their friends and classmates helps inform their attitudes and broaden their perspectives. Children who have had the opportunity to meet different kinds of people are naturally more open-minded and accepting. I think we can all agree that we would benefit from a generation of young people who are more tolerant and empathetic. Second, it is clear that the current multifamily ban in Woodbridge violates state and federal law. The Connecticut Zoning Enabling Act requires local zoning to promote housing for both low and moderate income households and to encourage opportunities for multifamily dwellings. The town zoning regulations also violate the federal and state Fair Housing Acts. If the town does not make changes to the current regulations, they will have to battle an inevitable lawsuit with its attendant economic burdens. This is a lawsuit that I think the town will lose. Recently, town officials established a committee on diversity and inclusion. What better way to walk the walk than to allow people from diverse economic backgrounds to live in this wonderful community? I believe we owe it to our children to be open-minded about the efforts of the Open Communities Alliance, and I hope that our town citizens will engage in a civil discourse about ways we can move forward together. Thank you.
Jane, thank you for that comment. I do also note that folks, if you have written comments, we will read all the written comments as well. You don't feel you have to read them into the record, but if you'd like to read them in the record, you're welcome to as well. That's the up next.
Up next, we have Chuck Pine. Chuck, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. My name is Chuck Pine and I live at 162 Center Road. Several points. Number one, when Ms. Anderson was going through the history of our zoning, I don't think she included the preamble to the original 1932 language. It talked about the importance of water and sewer and fire and oddly congestion. The vast majority of our town is still on, is obviously still on septic systems. And I was interested in the diagram that the builder showed that showed a septic system that can support 4 families. I don't know if there are any in Woodbridge, so I don't know how that can be within a regulation if we don't have any now. But getting past that, the fact that congestion was one of the issues in 1932, I think the folks in the flats would find laughable. There's been no discussion in increasing density in this town to the congestion that would likely follow wherever those buildings would be built. In fact, that's been one of the reasons I think that we've been limited in what we're going to do or what can be done with the property on Bradley Road. It's already a train wreck down there at exit 59, and to add more people to it is just it's insanity. So that's a consideration that I think has been summarily ignored in all these presentations. Most of the town is still on septic and certainly is still on aquifers. And I also didn't hear anything about the ability for a 4-family unit to effectively support a water supply from an aquifer perspective and what that does to the neighbors. One other point I'd like to make. Injecting a tenor of race into this conversation is beyond objectionable. It's gross. Woodbridge has been built over a lot of years, and people have worked hard to move into this town. And we worked hard to continue to afford to live in this town. And the only thing that's been driving the folks who come here has been their economics. It hasn't been their race. I would suspect that the folks who are black and brown, as you put it in your documentation, would be offended by the fact that the only way they can get in here is through government intervention. It's wildly inappropriate. This is a very liberal town, and I think anyone who would accuse us of otherwise hasn't done their homework properly and really should apologize to the town. So I'm going to ask the commission to summarily turn this entire proposal down and ask these folks to go peddle their wares elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pine, for your comment. Betsy, who is up next?
Next up, we have Alana Rosenberg. And Chuck, could I please ask you to click the hand icon again unless you have additional comments. Alana, you've been unmuted.
Thank you. Yes, I will be brief because I know it is a long evening. I just wanted to express my appreciation and support for the presentations tonight and for the proposal that's been put forth. I live on 20 Highland Road in Woodbridge, and I do believe it is our obligation to create more affordable housing opportunities in Woodbridge. Like many Woodbridge residents, I work in New Haven, and I believe my well-being and my family's well-being is tied to the well-being of the region as a whole. Woodbridge's excellent school system should be accessible to all who wish to live here, regardless of economic status. Having more economic diversity among residents in Woodbridge would enrich my family's life. My children would have more opportunity to know people from different walks of life. They would have a more realistic sense of the economic realities facing our county and state, and they would see the principles of do unto others in action, as we truly would then be treating our neighbors as we would want to be treated ourselves. Purposefully including some and excluding others for any reason, including economic reasons, is discriminatory. I believe we need to change our zoning policies to accommodate affordable housing throughout Woodbridge. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Up next, we have Daniel Cowan, and I've just unmuted you.
My name is Daniel Cowan. I live at 33 Wedgewood Drive. So housing prices in Woodbridge are currently falling. I personally purchased my own home for the median price of the state of Connecticut of $259,000. And simple Google search shows that the mean housing prices in Woodbridge have fallen $12,000 in the last year alone. So given the current tax situation where we have a largely residential tax structure and due to the failure of the town to develop any kind of commercial tax base, this proposal puts a nail in the coffin of the hope of ever having a balanced town budget. There's a basic assumption that affordable, aka low and affordable multifamily, has some causality with race. I implore this commission not to concede this point, nor to be bullied by these elitist individuals and to fall into this bigoted trap. This is a basic strategy of people who themselves have racist ideas and in their nature and are attempting to make that assumption of perception of reality. They're projecting onto other people their own racial biases. And this conversation has nothing to do with race. It's solely an issue of multifamily versus single family and has nothing to do with race. Ms. Abloh betrayed the true intention, stating that she feels the need to bring it up, and then made statements of her opinion about race that were not statements of fact, but only opinion. Single-family, owner-occupied houses can and should be built affordably. The list of communities that was presented had no towns in them, and they all ended in the name Haven. They did not include any of our fellow Amity towns of Bethany and Orange. It did not include any of our Derg B towns of Avon, Brookfield, Cheshire, Fairfield, Farmington, Glastonbury, Granby, Greenwich, Guilford, Medicine, Monroe, New Fairfield, Newtown, Orange, Simsbury, South Windsor, Trumbull, West Hartford, and Woodbridge. Those would be more comparable towns than East Haven, West Haven, and New Haven, not cities. Derg, which East Haven is a Derg G, and the further down the a B is a higher Derg, which is a demographic comparison between towns, demographic and grouping used for schools. So Derg G is East Haven and Hamden, Derg H is West Haven, Derg I is New Haven, very far away from a Derg B town such as ourselves. The architect did a decent job of making the house look like a single family home, excluding the nine car large parking lot indicated in the front of the building, which is not typical to any other Woodbridge home, and the consultant mentioned that same fact. The most importantly was that each of the presenters said it in one way or another, and it was best said by Ms. Boggs and Ms. Zhu, that we are initially proposing for now. This is just a foot in the door, and it is obvious that it is this group's intention to make more changes to our community once they achieve this first goal. The study that Mr. Poland mentioned was in reference to an urban Boston, not a residential town environment, so I feel it has no merit. Ultimately, this board needs to consider if they want a group of elitists from a nearby university to happen to them, or would they prefer to tell one of the most elite universities in the United States to leave us alone? Personally, I value single-family homes that are owned by the people that live here, and I understand that some people may not appreciate the values that come with that because it does not align with their own personal values or their objectives, but they fail to live themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cowan.
Next up, we have Raymond Burstein. Go ahead, you've been unmuted.
Yes, thank you. With only 3 minutes, it's pretty hard to point out all the flaws in this application, but I'm going to give it a try. I would respectfully request the commission to deny this application for a number of reasons. It is inconsistent with the well thought out Woodbridge Plan of Conservation and Development, which already addresses the affordability issue as follows. and I'm quoting from the town's own plan of conservation and development, amend the village district to include mixed use in specific locations, limit multifamily zoning to 1 and 2 bedroom units in village zones, adopt revisions to residential and village mixed use district to allow in-law apartments. I'm going to say this one slowly. Consider use of the country club of Woodbridge property, and also focus on affordability housing for seniors. The town spent a lot of time and wisdom in coming up with our plan of conservation and development, and it shouldn't be blown up by this group, which is really trying to, it's almost like a trick or a sleight of hand. Let's buy a single family home on Orchard Road and use that to blow up our zoning regulations with allegations of racism and all sorts of other nasty things in a town that I think is pretty progressive. And I think we should just sort of strike all that stuff from the record, or at least from our memory, some of these allegations. But it certainly would be a resume builder for some of the folks that are part of this team from the Yale Law School, but I don't think it doesn't really represent a well thought out land use plan. And I'm very confused about who the applicant actually is. We heard from the Yale Law School. We heard from a home builder in Southington. We heard from a planner in somewhere else. And the applicant, I think, is a so-called nonprofit. And I don't think we heard from them. I tried to get more information on them. I think their name is, or their backer is Garden Homes. If it's them, it's about a $15 million operation. And this is what they do. They go from town to town and try to sort of perpetuate their own views on other towns by blowing up their zoning regs. The other thing I'd like to just point out is this will disrupt water and waste disposal and traffic in town. It will have an adverse impact on property values where our mill rate is going up and our property values are going down. The timing isn't great. We're in the middle of a COVID calamity, and now we're being asked to consider a zoning application that could have vast and unforeseen impact. And one of the impacts certainly will be, if I were a developer, I go around and buy up every single family home I could find for the least amount of money I could, and then build 2, 3, 4 multi-unit homes on 3 acre, 1.5 acre lots, which this zoning reg would allow. So the character of the town would be substantially changed by virtue of this sleight of hand or this trick. And I would urge the zoning commission to deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burstein.
Next up, we have Sally Connolly. Sally, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Sally Connolly, and I live at 249 Newton Road, Woodbridge, and I've lived here for the past 26 years. I speak in favor of amending the current zoning regulations and the plan of conservation and development to enable multifamily affordable housing units to be built in Woodbridge. Woodbridge is fortunate to be part of New Haven County and neighbor to New Haven. As neighbors, we benefit from this proximity. We participate actively in the communities benefiting from a rich and diverse array of offerings. Museums, theaters, restaurants, retail establishments, recreational opportunities, higher education, religious congregations, sporting events, and many of us work in New Haven. But this neighborliness is currently a one-way street. We can go to New Haven to take advantage of its many resources, but our restrictive zoning keeps many New Haven residents from living in our community. The time is now to be a welcoming neighbor. Let's provide multifamily affordable housing that demonstrates regional cooperation and the true sharing of local resources. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly, for that comment. Betsy, who is next?
Next up, we have Noah Saffian, and Noah, you've been unmuted.
Hi, my name is Noah Saffian. Currently in the progress of going from 4 Tumblebrook Road to 24 Seymour Road. I've lived in Woodbridge basically my entire life. The first thing I'd say is that I don't appreciate the characterization of some of the former speakers that imply they speak for the whole town, and are basically implying that other people are trying to come in and change the character of our town. as you've heard already on this call, there are a number of Woodbridge residents. Without a poll, you wouldn't know exactly how many that support this plan wholeheartedly, myself included. And I understand these Yale people are driving the initiative, but I'm happy they're doing it. And if they're looking for people living in Woodbridge that are partners, I'd be happy to step up and do that, or even run the development myself, because I really believe in this. Particularly, I'd like to mention that I think nationally, not just in Woodbridge, integration and housing costs are two of the biggest problems. That integration probably gets talked about a lot, but housing cost doesn't. Where the difference between paying tens of thousands of dollars on rent and being able to afford to buy your own place and start building equity and wealth and a forced saving mechanism is massive. And at the moment, and through more recent history, there's just not, in more populated coastal areas, there's just not a lot of housing being built, which makes it hard for people to actually go and buy that first house and start to build wealth. And instead, they're paying tens of thousands of dollars a year, and it's a major contributing factor to the erosion of the middle class in America. So I think that's a very important thing to note. There's also been a bunch of comments on how race plays into the situation, and I think something I've learned about recently that's been that really applies to this is how the historic practice of redlining and openly racist housing practices prevented particularly Black families from purchasing housing and doing that, paying in of equity to build wealth and savings, which has created a strong, among other factors, a strong correlation between socioeconomic status and race. And it's been a big driver of that. And so the two things can't be separated. They're interlinked. And then my last point is that, last 2 points. When people talk about the town, changing dramatically in character and all of a sudden turning into something completely different, I've lived in Norwalk for a bit. I spent a lot of time in places like Norwalk and Stamford, places with lots of multifamily housing, even some apartment buildings, but also large suburban communities in parts of them. And there's no reason those things can't coexist. And then the last thing, the last thing I'd say is that, when I think about where I want to live, I'm 25, where I think where I want to think about where I want to build a family. I don't really want to do it in a community that looks like Woodbridge because of the way its zoning policies have limited who can live there, and limited it to upper middle class and upper class people and mostly white people. And so this would, when I think about where I want to live, a proposal like this would help make Woodbridge that kind of place.
Thank you for your comment. And if Sally and Noah, if you could please lower your hands. Is there anyone else in our virtual audience who would like to raise their hand?
We've got Frank Wang here. Frank, I will unmute you.
Thank you. This is Frank Wang from 3 Tumblebrook Road. We moved from New Haven to Woodbridge 15 years ago. We never feel race is the problem in Woodbridge. I'm Asian. I'm not white. So white, non-white never be a problem for Woodbridge. So that is a false claim. Number 2, water source. We have well water. 2017, we have a water contamination. The source is unknown. So what we call Quinnipiac Health District, Inspector John come, they never find the problem, but we suspect neighbor contamination. So the investigation, the source is unknown. How can builders ensure no water contamination for local residents? And also Woodbridge is the source for New Haven. How can you make sure millions of people water source not contamination without build that high density housing? Then third question is affordability. That house 3 Orchard Road probably cost us $300,000 bill for the land. And also the building cost probably $700,000. So almost $1 million house for a family compared to surrounding area. 4 family house is around $300,000 or $400,000. So that is a double or triple the cost for people to move here. So the affordability is a false claim. They only make a margin for builders. And also, Woodbridge, most are wetland. Many home has a sump pump to pump the water from the basement. And also have a sewage well. All the cost is almost $10,000 per year. How can you make sure that affordability for people to live here, unless open community this organization ask state to subsidize the cost for each family in Woodbridge to cut the maintenance cost to $2,000, which is the average in surrounding area in New Haven. So I disagree this proposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. And if you could please lower your hand. And are there any other participants who'd like to raise their hand at this time?
We've got somebody here. I'm going to try to pronounce his name, Sung Yan Lu. You've been unmuted.
Oh, hi everyone. This is Sonia Liu who live in the 47 Hosey Lane. I'm also Asian. And as a new immigrant, I'm moving to the Woodbridge 2 years ago. I'm a father of 2 sons, and I'm doing some comments to express my opposition to the proposal. I want to point out a few facts. So first of all, I need to point out there's an incomplete and inaccurate citation of the reference in this application. So on page 78 and 79, if you look at the racial composition of in the Woodbridge town, the total number is not near or close to 100%. So this is not very good presentation of how the racial composition in the Woodbridge town, and unfortunately, the population of Asian community is ignored. If you look at the censuses from United Census Bureau, the latest census estimated July 1st, 2019. If you look at it on the website, the Asian population in the Woodbridge town is about 15.3%. And this number has been increased in the past 10 years. So I agree with some former public that it's not very good to play the race card because we do have the migration of a certain population into this community. And we cannot just say that Woodbridge is racial exclusive or we have a racial segregation. So also, I want to point out is based on the same censuses from our United Census Bureau, about 20% of the Woodbridge residents are born in a foreign country. So we do have plenty of the immigrants that already live in the Woodbridge. So it's not good to consider the race as an excuse to propose such kind of the proposal. And another point I want to state is I'm very concerned about the increased unit that will lead to the increased students volume on the existing Woodbridge school system. So I just did some math. So as as Dr. Poland during the presentation, we have seen the current 2 Orchard Road will create the 9 motor vehicle parking for about 4 unit multi-unit housing. So if we based on this estimation, so if was in the proposal, the applicants propose to build up about 1,842 units. So then we will roughly bring up about over 4,000 new residents into the Woodbridge town. And so, but we need to know that Woodbridge actually only have about less than 9,000 people currently. And so the increased people population will count about 46%. So this sharp increase, I'm concerned it will increase a lot of workload or a lot of burden on our transfer station, on the sewage system, the water system, and eventually it will cause the increase on the students' volume, which may not good for the our children.
Mr. Liu, I do need you to wrap up soon.
Yeah, I think I will leave the comments. I will leave the rest of comments in a separate email. And thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Liu.
Next up, we have Kayla Sanders. Kayla, I've just unmuted you.
Yeah, thank you, Betsy. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the time and the conversation. I think, again, these are conversations that are important to have, but also important to consider the why and under which we're having it and the who is having the conversation. As a recent, as a newer Woodbridge member about 2 years ago, and as a woman of color, you know, I think that using some things like this and using that again as justification to me feels unauthentic and, you know, just fighting for the wrong reason or coming at it from the wrong approach. So I think as a town and as, you know, a free country, like we as the residents of this town really need to have these conversations. Again, I thank you for that. But it really should be the residents that have this conversation and make these decisions. And I really appreciate you bringing it up. But I think the continued conversation, at least from my point of view, again, as a woman of color, as a businesswoman, I can see where people are coming from. But I don't know if this is a civil rights and social justice issue as much as it's something that we need to think about how we can do a better job of, but not be forced into it. It needs to be something that the town feels comfortable with. It needs to be something that the residents feel comfortable with, and that can't be forced. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Folks who have their hands who've already spoken can lower them. And I will again invite anyone to raise their hand who hasn't had a chance yet tonight to speak.
We've got Dan Oren here next in line. Dan, I've just unmuted you.
Thank you. I live on Dales Drive in Woodbridge, and I've been a resident for 24 years. I'm impressed with the passion of Woodbridge residents who have spoken on both sides of the issue, and I see some meritorious points on both, and I would love if there's some way to reach a compromise position. I don't know if there is or not, but if this commission is to make a decision, I hope they'll try and find some way to bridge the divide. Failing that, I don't know how the distinguished members of the commission can have a good consensus of what the town really thinks unless there is some kind of a public referendum. And that, I mean, one of the things that I've loved about Woodbridge is the fact that we follow the New England tradition of having the opportunity for public referendums on important issues. And this seems like as important an issue as any that has come up. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Again, we'll invite those who have not had a chance yet who would like to speak tonight to raise their hand.
But Timothy Herbst here, and I just unmuted you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Timothy Herbst. I'm an attorney in Orange, Connecticut. Also on the call with me this evening is my law partner, Barbara Schellenberg. We are representing approximately a dozen residents that are concerned with various aspects of this proposal and want to make sure that we properly and thoroughly vet what is before you and offer what we believe will be constructive recommendations and to the commission in ways to responsibly handle any type of revisions to your plan of conservation and development. At the onset of this call, approximately 2.5 hours ago, you indicated that the commission would be continuing the meeting and have a hard stop of about 9 p.m. I have been in touch with, over the weekend, the town attorney and special counsel for the town relative to this issue. We would respectfully request the ability to make our own presentation at a future meeting to be determined by date that will likely include our own expert testimony. And in addition, we want to preserve our right to ask questions of the applicant, which we would be entitled to in this administrative proceeding. So I just wanted to let every other member of the public speak first. And I wanted to raise those issues for your consideration collectively and respectfully make that request. I did speak to counsel for the town over the weekend, and they indicated that that would not be a problem, but just want to put that out on the record.
Thank you, Attorney Herbst, and we will take your request under advisement. Do we have other members of the public who still would like to raise their hands and offer a public comment? I do note that we are going to continue this hearing, so for folks who are still formulating what question they may want, I'll still hold on for a few more minutes for folks who might want to do that now, but you're always welcome to submit a formal comment in writing or when we have our continued hearing, which we will talk about the date of that shortly. Betsy, do we see any more hands raised? I see Mr. Herbst, your hand is still up, and I know Mr. Wang's hand is still up.
There are no additional members of the public in line.
Excellent. So,
excuse me. Spoke too soon.
I know if you wait just long enough, there'll be someone who wants to raise their hand.
Lou Rotolo, I'm going to unmute you right now. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. It took me a while to find out where that hand was. I've been a resident for Woodbridge for 30 years. I'm on Crestview Drive. My concern with this multifamily housing proposal is the congestion that it's going to introduce into town and the aesthetics of creating single-family homes amongst multifamily homes. Now, I know the presentation said that they were going to develop a house that looks very much like the multifamily home or the single-family homes in town. But how do I know the next guy does that and the one after that and the 10 after that? What controls that? And they conveniently didn't mention, and few people did, the 8 or 9 car parking lot that's out in front of the house. How is a multitude of those spread through our town going to make it look? The character of our town is going to be significantly degraded. And also, does this multifamily housing open up the possibility of condos in town, which again destroys the aesthetics and homogeneity of our town? And maintenance on the properties by rentals is not really the priority as it is with the person who owns it. So I question how well houses will be maintained. More importantly, what is the impact on our taxes? The town as a result of having to have maybe not a volunteer fire department anymore, but as the town grows and more people are in here, you're going to need a full-time fire department. It's going to cost a lot more money. You're going to need more police. You're going to need more emergency. And for sure, you're going to need more schooling. the proposal states that most of the lower income housing people or lower income people are people with children. That puts an enormous burden on our tax resources. Costs about $17,000 to educate a single student in town. If you look at that proposal on Orchard Road, you're increasing the house size from about 3,500 feet to 5,000 square feet. If the taxes increase proportionally, you're going to take in the instead of the $10,000 you're taking in now, you might double that to maybe $20,000. So you get an extra $10,000 in taxes. However, you're going to increase the number of students going to school from the 2, typically, for a single family home, to possibly 8 for a 4-family home. You're putting 6 more kids into the school system with a total cost of somewhere around $100,000, and you're only taking in an extra $10,000 in taxes. Where does the extra money come from? I know where it comes from. It comes from the rest of us. Taxes are already very expensive in town. They're going to go up considerably if we burden the school system with that many more kids. And then as the town grows further with more multifamily housing, the school won't be big enough. We'll have to build another one. Where is that money coming from? Who's paying that cost? So the very elaborate proposal, 125, but I see nothing talk about the cost of all. It's the rest of us that have to bear that. If it continues, I don't know if I can afford to stay in this town any longer. I would be forced out. I don't believe that's conveniently neglected, in addition to the 9-car parking lot that was on Orchard Road. Finally, I believe that Woodbridge does have affordable housing. I was raised in a multifamily house in New Haven in the inner city. My father was a carpenter. We lived through the 1930s depression. I attended New Haven Public Elementary School and high school. Then I attended the University of Connecticut. After I graduated, I continued to live in that same house in New Haven, but on a 3rd floor because I was married. I worked and saved my money, and I bought the house that I now own in Woodbridge. I was not privileged. I came from working class parents, lived half of my life in the inner city. I didn't come to Woodbridge until I was 37, and I attended all public schools. That same opportunity is available to everyone. Woodbridge housing is affordable. It's a long path of hard work. The path is mostly uphill. There's no buses to take up that hill. You need to walk it, but it's worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruotolo. So I will ask again, hopefully, Betsy, maybe remind folks where that little hand raising button is, just in case there's someone else searching for it.
On a PC or a computer, it should be on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you're on a smartphone, it is probably one of the circular buttons near the bottom of your screen.
All right. Going once, going twice. I think we've had our public comments from the public for this evening. So I want to thank them for their participation and for their thoughtful comments throughout that session. I'm looking at the clock, and we've been going at this for quite a while, and there is quite a lot of material to digest, which has been presented tonight, and of course, which the applicants have submitted. So I'd like to, I guess, talk about wrapping up for tonight and scheduling the continuation of this public hearing, where I think it's in our best interest to have the public to as well have a chance to digest the materials that I assume the applicants are going to send in to Ms. Sullivan, and she'll post on our websites. Yes, Paul Schatz.
Rob, can you remind the public where exactly they can find the presentations on the website? It's not always, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and it's not always intuitive. So I think it would, rather than people start sending emails around, it would be great if we could remind them where exactly to find it.
Yeah, and Chris Sullivan, I have to Google it every time I find it myself. So
there's two ways that you can do it. It's on the town, thanks to Betsy. It's on the town planning and zoning page of the website. The ones that were submitted for today, I do have in a PDF form. So if someone wants to send me an email, I will certainly short circuit the hunt on the town planning and zoning webpage, and I will just send it to someone back if they send me an email. Just say, can you send me submissions? And I can do that. So my email is ksullivan@woodbridgect.org. Phone number, if you lose that, is 203-389-3406.
Thank you, Chris. A couple more housekeeping items. I know that Attorney Herbst has made a request. I'd like for Attorney Herbst to make it a formal request and a formal submission on his request to participate, just so we have something, again, that's filed on the public record that we can react to. And then I was looking at our calendar and I thought that a continuation of this hearing until Monday, January 4th of 2021 would be an appropriate amount of time for digestion of the material that's in front of us and including whatever is going to be coming in from the applicants or this request from Attorney Herbst and those who he represents. I know we have our normal Monday, first Monday of the month hearing then at 7:30, which is a time we could use. Or Chris, if we did the other options, we could do an earlier start, but that would be technically a special meeting that would need its own.
And then you'd have to end it. I should tell you that you are going to have a fairly major application coming in that will require a public hearing regarding the brewery down on Bradley Street. That is being submitted to you for receipt at your December 7th meeting, and they were looking to have a public hearing on that at your January 4th meeting. And they're anxious to get shovels in the ground on that project.
So what is that? That may counsel if we wanted to do them both on that day to start this one at 6 and then go for an hour and a half and then shift gears to our normal hearing. Takes a long night, but I'm looking to my commission members for their reactions to that. I see a thumbs up from Yoni at least, and Jeff too.
So Rob, if we don't get through, if we start at 6 and we end at 7:20, 7:25 for the regular scheduled meeting, and we don't finish by that time, that hearing would then be continued to another date and the originally scheduled meeting would begin on time. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's what I'm saying. We have, so under the sort of public hearing rules, they've been amended by the fact that we're under these sort of COVID restrictions. So normally and I believe it's the 65-day sort of date from when you start a hearing. No, 35, sorry.
35.
Thank you. 35 after you start a hearing would be that January 4th date, 35 days from today. But because we do get this sort of 90-day extension of time that we can use to extend the public hearing or to extend the time in which we are deliberating on the applicant's materials. And that's another thing. You can close the public hearing and we can then schedule our deliberations and discussions for a later date. We just can't, after that point, add anything to the public hearing record or ask questions of the applicants. That would just be our work session time, can be at a different time other than the time that we close the public hearing. Paul, is that helpful? Sorry.
What's the proposal?
So I think the proposal would be to have a 6 o'clock start time for the continuation of the public hearing portion on that January 4th, which is the first Monday in January date. And then run that public hearing with, again, starting with public comments first, and then likely our questions of the applicants, and then the applicants can react to our questions and the public comments kind of all at once in that time period in early January. And we'll have whatever else has been added to the record in this intervening time.
I would be somewhat concerned that that was insufficient time to allow for all that to happen within 90 minutes.
Yeah, so well, Andrew, I appreciate that. So we would have the opportunity to continue it with our 90-day sort of leeway granted under the governor's executive order.
Given that there will be another group presenting to us as a part of this, I don't know. I guess I'd like to know when the 90 days ends so we know what we're looking at.
Okay, so your normal end of your hearing would have to be January 4th. Under COVID and the executive order from Governor Lamont, you have an additional 90 days that you can use anywhere you want. So you could add 90 days for continuing the public hearing from January 4th, which would basically get you through to the very beginning of April.
All right, that's good to know. I thought the 90 days was 90 days total versus 90 days on top of the existing time.
Right,
So
it's just like
fair about that.
Yeah, it's 90 days that you have in your pocket that you can insert anywhere in the process. I should note that you have 65 days once you close the hearing to make a decision. So that you have that time frame in mind.
But again, if I read it correctly, for instance, if you wanted to continue the public hearing for 30 days and another month, and good point that we may have another presenter depending on what we see coming in from Attorney Herbst and his folks. You can continue, you can use 30 of your days to extend the public hearing, and then you still have 60 days with which you can extend that 65-day normal sort of term for the regular deadline for your decision.
Right.
I believe that's the case. So you can use that 90 days flexibly, which is a nice part of the governor's executive order. So I think regardless, it would be good to get in some time on that January 4th date and get as far as we can and know that we do have this ability to some flexibility due to COVID.
Alternatively, you could do it on the 11th and have the early start time of 6 and run to 9 again, where you would just be dealing with this particular issue, and then you'd be fresh for your regular meeting for the people that will be coming there, and you would be fresh for this. But that's your choice, not mine.
So for the commission members, it's, do you want one long day in January or 2?
Well, I like committing to one long day, knowing that we might need to commit to others after, because of, I mean, I don't know if Attorney Herbst makes a presentation, would that be before we close the public hearing or after? I just don't know what we're looking at in terms of time frame. So I guess I'd rather go for a long one on the 4th and leave open the possibility of other meetings later, but that's just me. I'm just one member.
Clearly, his presentation would have to be part of your public hearing. Otherwise, you couldn't consider anything that he said. So it has to be part of the public hearing.
That's why it's good not to go too late.
So, Yoni or Jeff, any thoughts or reactions?
Kathleen makes a compelling, she does make a compelling point about committing to one late night and then having to potentially extend, schedule another continuance, even though we have that 90 days in our pocket.
So so that would be starting at 6 or
right?
Or would you want to just, we can start at 6 with this one, go to our regular meeting at 7:30 and go through the brewery and then come back to this?
That's what I would
night.
Yeah.
I got Andrew giving me a look.
As Paul Shack would say, it's the chairman's prerogative, I think, to do this.
The brewery presentation is not going to be a 5-minute presentation in its hearing.
Understood.
But will there be free samples that night?
No, there will be no free samples. We've gone through this before.
Okay. I need to plan accordingly.
So I think in the interest of time and sanity, let's plan for the 6 o'clock start time for the continuation of this public hearing. We'll go up till 7:30 and go through the brewery presentation. And at the end of, when we get, into that, time period, we may get a better sense of what we still have left in this, whether we would need to, so here's a question, Chris, can we put it on both the special agenda at 6 and the regular agenda for the 7:30 meeting that we may or may not get to?
We could do the brewery hearing first, and then you could do, I guess, although I don't know how that works. Because when you do a hearing continuation, you normally have to post, where you're adjourning to, but that's when it's from one day to the other. I don't have an answer on that. I'd have to defer to council.
And I'd probably rather not complicate those procedural elements. So let's just do a 6 to 7:30 so we can get some more work done on this one and probably hear another presentation or so, and obviously public comment, because that will be a key part of that January 4th meeting. And then we may end up having to schedule another meeting dedicated to this that will eat into our 90-day governor's executive order timeline. Okay.
How long does the governor's order go? I thought it had initially gone to December 31st.
In September, it was extended until February. I don't know how that affects timeframes that were in place before.
Okay.
But that's, Kathleen, a good question to ask our council as well. Okay. So now that we have a date, applicants, I assume that's okay with you?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. So we did almost make it till 9 o'clock. So I'm going to, again, reiterate my thanks to the applicants for their comprehensive presentation. Thanks always to Chris and Betsy for helping out and making the technology work. It is always really appreciated. Thanks to all our commission members for being very good listeners and for your engagement on this today and in the weeks and months to come. It is much appreciated. I know there's a lot to digest here. But most of all, for the public who is still hung on with us or are watching out there on our public TV stations, thank you for your participation tonight, for your written comments, which we've received so far, for the written comments that we hope you continue to submit while the record is still open, and we welcome you to come back keep an eye on the website. It will have all the dates and times available when we'll be back again discussing these important issues. So for those who couldn't quite think of the question they wanted to ask tonight, you will have that opportunity. We're going to start the public hearing on that Monday, January 4th date with your questions first, and then go from there. Other than that, I am not going to close this public hearing. I am going to continue it to our January 4th date, and we'll be clear about that. Do I need Chris always asks, do I need a motion to continue or just general consent that we're going to do?
You know, this is pretty official. Let's do a motion.
So moved. Do I have a second? I saw Jeff Kennedy raise a hand first. Sorry, Kathleen. So moved by Paul Schatz, seconded by Jeff Kennedy.
But Jeff isn't voting.
And Kathleen.
Thank you.
Chris, you're always keeping us honest. I appreciate it.
Try.
So moved in second to continue our public hearing until 6
I'm so
p.m.
sorry. Can I interrupt? Oh, sorry. You got to it. Thank you. Sorry. The original motion had to include the time, but I.
Yes, so it's a motion to continue our public hearing to a special meeting at 6 p.m. on January 4th, 2021. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? We are continuing our hearing until 6 p.m. on January 4th, 2021. Thank you all for your participation tonight. And hopefully folks will go have dinner.
See you next week, right?
Oh, yeah, we're on again next week for our regular meeting. Yeah. Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.